Hello and welcome to another update. In this one, I'll be covering the latest developments throughout the front line, starting out in the Zaporizhzhia front, where we see here that the Ukrainians have managed to advance in two directions. First off is to the south of Robotyne, where here the Ukrainian forces have managed to advance in the direction of Novoprokopivka. They now have full control over the fortifications to the south of Robotyne. So with this, they now have a solid hold of Robotyne and are able to hold onto it in case they stop their offensive. In this direction, the Russian forces have now been pushed back to the heights here to the north of Novoprokopivka. They have some fortifications here by the road as well as by the outskirts of the village to the northwest. But then they have the high ground to the east, and these are the current positions of the Russian forces, while the Ukrainian forces continue their assaults towards these positions and moving further southwestwards from their current holdings. We also see that there's fighting to the west of Robotyne. Here the Ukrainians do not have control over the fortifications that we see here in the western parts of the village, but they are fighting onwards and pressuring the Russian forces in the area, trying to completely cut them off from Robotyne. With the ongoing assaults on these villages of Novoprokopivka and to the west of Robotyne, the Ukrainian forces continue their efforts and advancing towards Ilchenkove and Novoprokopivka to reach the Russian first line of defense in this part of the front line. So we're seeing that there is a continuous attempt in the direction of Novoprokopivka and Ilchenkove as the Russian forces are being pushed further back. As for the eastern parts, we see that the Ukrainian forces have gained further access to the trench network behind the Russian first defensive line. So we're seeing here that the Ukrainian plan seems to be to take full control over the trenches overlooking the first line of defense with the anti-tank ditches as well as the dragon teeth, because if they have control over this trench here, they can establish proper positions to advance through the anti-tank ditch with a large contingency of armored vehicles as well as tanks, so that they can properly prepare for a large assault across the main defensive line. The current situation here across the Robotyne direction is that the Ukrainian forces continue establishing positions by the first main defensive line of the Russian forces. They're trying to establish positions to enable the Ukrainian forces to then launch assaults with the armored vehicles across the anti-tank ditches, because currently we have so far seen a few infantry fighting vehicles across, but not much more than that, and there was a small group of 3. So with this, they see that there is an effect with the establishment of the positions, and they're now able to traverse through the anti-tank ditches with a few infantry fighting vehicles. But if the Ukrainians want to launch a major assault, major breakthrough, they would need a lot more across. And we have seen this hinted by both Budanov and Zelensky that they are waiting for a major breakthrough very soon, just before the rainy season and muddy season begins. And the reason for this is that they need some sort of results for this 3.5-month long offensive. So far, they've managed to capture Robotyne and breach the first line of defense. They need a proper breakthrough where they manage to establish positions across not just the first defensive line, but by the second one, at the least at a position where they, at the next offensive, can threaten Tokmak, capture Tokmak, or at the very least threaten Tokmak right now, with a capture of the trenches here in between the first and second line of defense, as well as threatening the second line of defense that goes from Rovanievske through Ochere to Novate and down south to Tokmak, as the Ukrainian forces here are trying to prepare for a second offensive. They can use the shield of the fall season to establish positions, prepare defenses, and so on. If the Russians decide to counterattack, then there is a different situation. But if the Russians continue as is, they can build up a new force for the next spring, for the next summer, and then try again. Moving on to the next part of the front, we see here in the direction of Staromayorsk and Urashine, the Ukrainian forces continue their attacks to the east of Urashine, trying to push the Russians back from their positions here. As for the direction of Novodonetsk, Novomayorsk, Shevchenkov, and so on, the Ukrainian forces have continued operations here for a few weeks, but they have so far been unable to breach this defensive line. The Ukrainian forces managed to enter the northern outskirts of Novomayorsk, But according to latest developments from Deep State Map, the pro-Ukrainian source, we see that the Ukrainian forces have not managed to establish positions and were actually pushed out of this. They mentioned in that same post that the Ukrainian forces have through a year tried to breach this on multiple occasions. Last summer and through the fall season, as well as in the spring season, and now again here in the summer, the Ukrainian forces have continuously tried to establish positions across this river line and try to push back the Russian forces from these defensive positions. The river line that goes through here is one that the Russians are currently using as the defensive line to the north of the villages of Novodonetsk, Novomayorsk, and Shevchenkove. The Ukrainian forces have tried to continuously breach this defensive line, but the main issues that they're facing is the elevation difference. So if we take a look at the topographic map here, the road is the first part which goes through these northern parts. This is located at the low grounds. Then we have some high grounds to the south of it. But then the river line that goes through to the southeast of Velika Novosilka goes through the northern parts of Novomayorsk, Novodonetsk, and so on. So with this, we see that the Ukrainian forces, if they want to capture these villages, they'll have to cross over a river line and fight in the low ground, while the Russian forces have the high ground in these positions to just have direct fire opportunities on the Ukrainian forces. So the Ukrainian forces here need to fight a superior Russian force in the sense that they have more equipment, more firepower, and larger numbers, while they have to cross over a river line and fight in the low ground. So this is all terrible conditions for the Ukrainian forces. This is why they've so far been unable to succeed. If we take a look at the Robotyne direction, we see here that the Russian forces, although they have some high ground positions, this is the Tokmak directions, and then further north we see that there are some high ground positions in this whole area filled with flatlands, and these high ground positions are exactly where the Russians have built their first line of defense. This is why it is so successful, because the Ukrainian forces have to push through these high grounds to actually establish positions. We see here that this is the direction of Robotyne, and then further south we have some further fortifications for the Russian forces. So the whole planning of the Russian forces when they were building these fortifications is to make the most use of all of the geographical positions and advantages that they have by putting a lot of minefields in the low grounds and then establishing fortifications in the high grounds so that the Ukrainians are forced to move through the low grounds to establish better positions in this direction. We see here that the elevation difference is 150 meters for the Russian forces and then all the way down to 70 meters for the Ukrainian forces. This is an 80-meter difference in the favor of the Russian forces. So the general strategy of the Russian forces in this direction is to establish positions that the Ukrainians will have the most difficulty breaking through and then fortifying them as much as possible. This is all to drain down the Ukrainian combat prowess so that they are unable to continue fighting. This is all in preparation for either peace negotiations or for an offensive. It is one of the two, because there's no purpose of a force that is fighting if they do not want to either completely dominate the opponent with their military might or to gain a better position to negotiate. If the Russian forces do not attempt either in the next fall season or in the winter season, then there is no plan on the Russian side to end this war. They just want to continue it for whatever reason. If we go to the south of Bakhmut, we see here that the fighting continues over the hills to the east of Klishivka and within the village itself. As for to the north of the village, we see that the Ukrainian forces managed to fully capture the field here to the north, which includes the fortifications to the west of Klishivka, and then there's fighting ongoing in the forest lines here to the north of the village. And that is all of the territorial changes as well as the rest of the update for today's video. Thank you all for watching and have a great day.